February 14th, 2023, Valentine's Day. While most people were celebrating love with flowers and chocolates, something strange was happening in a small apartment in Novosibirsk, Russia. A 52-year-old factory worker named Alexei Petrov was sitting alone, crying over his laptop. Not because he was lonely, but because he'd just discovered a song that somehow understood his entire life, written in a language he'd never heard before, by people from a country he couldn't point to on a map. Within 72 hours, his reaction video would be viewed 12 million times across Russia. Within 3 weeks, Russian psychologists would be studying what they called the Manila effect. And within 6 months, 2 governments would sign a cultural agreement that had nothing to do with politics, and everything to do with 3 chords and the truth. This is the real story of how music did what diplomacy couldn't. Alexei Petrov wasn't looking for meaning that day. He was just trying to get through another Siberian winter. The kind where darkness comes at 3 p.m. and temperatures drop to -35. Where your face hurts when you walk outside and small talk dies in frozen breath. Alexei worked the night shift at an automotive parts factory. Repetitive work. Loud machines. 12-hour shifts where you're alone with your thoughts whether you want to be or not. He'd been doing this for 28 years. His routine was simple. Work, sleep, eat, repeat. His daughter had moved to Germany 3 years ago for university and never came back. Not because they fought, but because life just pulled them in different directions. His ex-wife remarried. His friends from youth had scattered. He wasn't depressed exactly, just empty, like a house where all the furniture had been removed. That Valentine's evening, he couldn't sleep after his shift. Scrolling through YouTube at 4 a.m. trying to tire his eyes enough to rest. The algorithm suggested a video. Russian man cries singing foreign song. 10 million views. He almost scrolled past it. These viral videos were usually fake, overly dramatic. But something made him click. The video showed a middle-aged man in a Moscow karaoke bar. Cheap lighting, cigarette smoke. The man was singing something that sounded Southeast Asian. Alexei couldn't place it. But halfway through, the man's voice cracked. Real tears. Not performance crying. The kind that comes from somewhere you can't control. The camera shook as even the person filming started crying. Alexei read the comments. This song destroyed me. I don't understand one word, but I've never felt so understood. What is this? Why do I feel like it was written about my life? Hundreds of comments. Thousands. All from Russians. All saying the same thing. This song sees me. The song was called Anak, Filipino, written in 1978 by an artist named Freddie Aguilar. Alexei clicked on the original. Alexei didn't speak Tagalog, didn't know anything about Filipino culture, had never been further south than Kazakhstan. But as he listened, something inside him broke open. The melody was simple, just acoustic guitar and voice. But there was something in the phrasing, the way the singer's voice carried both strength and vulnerability, how it sounded like a confession and a prayer at the same time. He found a translation in the comments. The song was about a son who disappointed his parents, who made mistakes, who wandered far from home, and a parent who, despite everything, never stopped loving him. Alexei read the translated lyrics 3 times. Then he picked up his phone, hands shaking, and called his daughter in Berlin. It was 5 a.m. in Russia, 1 a.m. in Germany. She answered, worried. Papa? What's wrong? He hadn't called her in 4 months. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know what to say anymore. The distance had created a language neither of them spoke. Nothing is wrong, he said quietly. I wanted to hear your voice. There was a long silence. I miss you, Papa. I miss you too, Katya. So much. They talked for 2 hours. About nothing important. About everything important. When they hung up, Alexei was crying. Then he did something he'd never done before. He hit record on his laptop camera, pulled up the Anak instrumental track, and sang along, reading the transliterated Tagalog lyrics phonetically, his Russian accent thick his voice untrained. He posted it with a simple caption: "To every parent and child who forgot how to talk. This song is a bridge." Then he went to sleep. Alexei woke up 14 hours later to 847 notifications. His video had been shared 50,000 times. The views were climbing so fast the number kept changing when he refreshed. But more than that, the comments. "I just called my father for the first time in 2 years because of this. My son sent me this video. We're meeting for dinner tomorrow. I'm a 60-year-old man crying in my kitchen because a song from the Philippines just explained my entire relationship with my kids." Within days, Russian television picked it up. A morning show host interviewed Alexei via video call. "Why do you think this song resonates so deeply with Russians?" Alexei thought carefully. "Because we're taught to be strong, to endure, to not burden others with our feelings. But this song, it gives us permission. Permission to say, 'I failed,' or 'I'm sorry,' or 'I need you.' And in Filipino culture, apparently that's normal. They sing about feelings the way we talk about weather." The host nodded. "And you don't even speak Tagalog?" "No. But I don't need to. Pain sounds the same in every language. So does love." Something unexpected started happening. Russians across the country began recording their own versions. A grandmother in Vladivostok, a soldier on leave in Kaliningrad, a group of factory workers in Alexei's own city. But unlike typical viral trends, these weren't polished or joking. They were raw, real. Many were crying. Some sang to the camera as if confessing to someone who wasn't there. YouTube's algorithm began connecting Russian users with Filipino users in the comments. Filipinos started responding, "This song made my father cry when I was young. Now it's making Russian fathers cry. Music has no borders." Welcome to Filipino emotion. We don't hide how we feel. Come visit us. You pronounce it wrong, but you feel it right. That's what matters. A Russian cultural journalist wrote an article titled, "Why Are We Crying Over a Foreign Song?" It went viral too. Her theory: Russians have one of the richest emotional cultures in the world. Deep literature, profound music, intense spirituality. But we've also been conditioned to suffer silently, to keep family problems private, to never show weakness. Filipino culture, she wrote, does the opposite. They sing their pain in public. They share their struggles openly. They cry together. And Russians, starved for emotional permission, were finally exhaling. May 2023. The Philippine embassy in Moscow was receiving strange requests. Hundreds of emails from Russians asking about Filipino music, about language lessons, about cultural exchange programs that didn't exist yet. The cultural affairs officer, a woman named Maria Santos, saw an opportunity. She reached out to Alexei directly. "Would you be willing to come to the Philippines? We want to create a program. Russian students learning Filipino music. Filipino students learning Russian poetry. A real exchange." Alexei, who'd never traveled internationally, said yes immediately. When he landed in Manila, the heat hit him like a wall. Everything was loud, colorful, overwhelming. A small crew from a Filipino documentary team was waiting. They'd been following the story from the beginning. They took him to a modest house in Quezon City, where Freddy Aguilar, now 70 years old, was waiting. The two men sat across from each other, one Filipino, one Russian, both in their 50s and 60s, both fathers, both carrying decades of unspoken things. Through a translator, Freddy spoke first. "I wrote Anak when I was angry at myself, at my mistakes, at how I hurt my parents. I never imagined it would travel so far." Alexei's voice was shaking. "Your song helped me call my daughter. We hadn't really talked in years, not because of fighting, just because we forgot how." Freddy reached across and took Alexei's hand. "Then it did what I hoped. It reminded you that love doesn't disappear. It just gets quiet. And sometimes we need music to make it loud again." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Freddy picked up his guitar, the same one from the original recording, and began playing Anak. Alexei, in his broken Tagalog, sang along. The documentary crew was crying behind the cameras. September 2023. The cultural center of the Philippines in Manila. For the first time in history, a joint Russian-Filipino concert titled Songs Without Borders. 50 Russian singers who'd gone viral. 50 Filipino musicians, one stage. The event was live-streamed. Over 3 million people watched live, split evenly between Russia and the Philippines. The program was simple. Russians would sing Filipino classics. Filipinos would sing Russian ballads, all in the original languages. When Alexei walked on stage, the crowd went silent. He stood at the microphone, visibly nervous. Behind him, a full Filipino orchestra waited. He spoke in slow, practiced Tagalog, learned over 4 months of daily lessons. Salamat sa musika. Salamat sa pag-ibig. Thank you for the music. Thank you for the love. The crowd erupted. This time, when he sang, his Tagalog was clear, still accented, but sincere. And when he reached the chorus, something magical happened. The entire Filipino audience sang with him. 3,000 voices filling the hall. Then, on the live stream, Russians watching from home began singing too. In their living rooms, in bars, in cars pulled over on Siberian highways. 2 nations, 7,000 miles apart, singing the same song at the same time. After the performance, the Russian and Philippine governments announced a formal cultural partnership. Music exchange programs in schools, joint festivals, language learning initiatives using songs instead of textbooks. But the real agreement was already signed, not in ink, but in tears and melodies. Today, Alexei still works at the factory in Novosibirsk, still does night shifts, still lives in the same small apartment. But now, every Sunday, he video calls his daughter. They talk for hours. Sometimes they just sing together, Filipino songs, Russian songs, doesn't matter. She's planning to visit this Christmas, first time in 4 years. In Russia, something shifted. Karaoke bars report 300% increase in bookings. Therapy groups use music as a tool. Schools teach Anak alongside Pushkin. Filipinos working in Russia, nurses, engineers, caregivers, say they're treated differently now. Not as foreigners, as the people who taught us how to feel again. One Filipino nurse in Moscow said it best. Before, when I sang at work, people thought I was unprofessional. Now they ask me to teach them the songs. They say it makes the hospital feel less cold. There's a small monument now in Gorky Park in Moscow. 2 hands releasing a dove carved in stone. Beneath it, lyrics in Tagalog and Russian. Anak, hindi kita malilimutan. Child, I will never forget you. Because this story was never really about viral videos or cultural diplomacy. It was about what happens when people who've learned to bury their hearts hear someone else singing theirs out loud. It was about a generation of Russians realizing that strength doesn't mean silence. That loving someone means telling them. That distance, whether 7,000 miles or just 3 years of not calling, can be closed with a song. Freddie Aguilar wrote Anak 45 years ago in a small room in Manila, never imagining where it would travel. Today, it's sung in over 26 languages. But perhaps nowhere has it meant more than in the coldest parts of the world, where people needed to be reminded that warmth doesn't come from the sun. It comes from the courage to sing when everything tells you to stay silent. This is the story of how a Filipino song made a Russian cry, and how those tears melted something frozen between 2 nations that nobody knew was there. 1 song, 2 worlds, infinite connections.